Welcome to Fix It Home Improvement, covering projects that every homeowner should know and great products for home and garden.
Hi, I'm JC, and this is where we share our home improvement tips. I'm here with my co-host, Cindy.
Hello, JC.
Hi, Cindy. This week we spoke to Justinian from asbestosclaims.law about asbestos. Justinian, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Real good. I spent years remodeling old homes in the Chicago area, and I was interested in learning about the dangers of asbestos and how to stay safe if you're working in an old home. Can we start out with what asbestos is?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I'd like to talk quite a lot about asbestos and how to stay safe in home remodels, because I do see people make mistakes all the time, and I cringe every time I do. Asbestos is a fiber that comes from a rock. So it's a rock that you can crush it up and it can be woven into cloth, into string. It looks more like a plant than it does a rock. And because it is a rock, it has a lot of strength to it. So it was used in construction for years and years and years to reinforce things, and also because it's fireproof. So for a long time, they would put asbestos into just about anything they could because it's cheap, it's going to be lightweight, and it's fireproof. Sounds great for construction, right?
Yeah, very interesting. What was asbestos used for?
The major uses of asbestos, the largest single use, I think, was asbestos cement. So some people have called it transite. That's like the corrugated sheeting, but it was also in miles and miles of sewer pipe, big commercial installations and stuff like that. But it wasn't just in pipes. It was in just about everything. It would have been in drywall. It was in paint. It was absolutely in insulation. The first oven to have glass doors was insulated with asbestos. It's inside electronic devices, all over, you name it. And they used it so much because it came from the ground. It was really, really inexpensive, and it was really durable. It would resist a lot of chemicals that would destroy other things. And it was also lightweight. So if you made something with asbestos, it could be lighter than if you had to make it with other things. And as I mentioned also, it was fireproof. So a lot of asbestos products came into play after some fires in the early part of the 20th century where people died. And the solution was, geez, if we could make everything fireproof, we wouldn't have to have these issues. So those were kind of the major uses of it. And by the mid to late 60s, there wasn't a single home or commercial structure in America that wasn't built with at least something made out of asbestos.
So why was asbestos banned for most products in the home?
The asbestos fibers are really small, they're microscopic, and they embed themselves in your tissue. If you breathe enough of them, they will go into your lung tissue over a period of time and cause a breathing disease called asbestosis. It's physically destroying your lung tissue. Those tiny needle-like fibers going in and obliterating your lung tissue just like an ice pick would. So over time, that was the first disease that came out. And as time went on, they discovered that asbestos also causes cancer. Lung cancer is a big one. And the cancer you've probably heard of called mesothelioma, that's caused by asbestos. So after decades and decades, they eventually realized this stuff is too dangerous to keep using and began phasing it out.
When I first started investing in real estate and I was learning how to renovate homes, my business partner and I were trained by a few remodelers, and they warned us about the potential dangers of some materials like floor tiles, ceiling tiles, and insulation. What products might have asbestos in them?
The vinyl floor tile, those usually, I think they were 9-inch squares, but they did make them in different sizes. And a lot of them had really colorful patterns, and some were just the really boring colors that you see in like old institutions, cafeterias and things like that. The asbestos was added in with the vinyl to reinforce the tile at a cheap cost, and it's absolutely in the tile. It also would have been in some of the adhesives and mastics that this tile would have been stuck down with. And the ceiling tiles, they put asbestos in them for acoustic properties. I forget the gentleman's name off the top of my head, but it was an ancient Greek or Roman, and he discovered that if you would wrap an asbestos cloth around a tree when you went to chop it down, the noise didn't carry as far. So it was a great noise deadener, and that's when they first figured it out. The Hollywood Bowl out in California, that was built with asbestos acoustic stuff. Lots of places where that's what it would have been in the ceiling tiles for, is to help with acoustic noise. And you've got your ceiling tiles and floor tiles. Paint would have been a big one, drywall, and absolutely insulation. vermiculite insulation and adits would have been contaminated a lot with asbestos. So those are all sources of large exposure.
What age home might have products with asbestos?
Anything built before the early 80s has a decent chance of it. And if it's built in the 40s, 50s, 60s, into maybe even the 70s, it almost certainly has asbestos in it. Unless it's a early to late 80s home somewhere in there, you can't be certain it wasn't built with it. By the early 80s, the health risks were well enough known, and a lot of the companies had been sued, so it had been pulled out of a lot of products by then. But any of your, houses from the 50s and 60s, yeah, it's all over it.
If you're purchasing an older home, can a home inspector check for asbestos?
Yeah, you can check and they can have, I'm suspicious that this is asbestos because it visually has its own kind of appearances. But the only way to be sure is take a sample of it and send it to a lab who can put it under a microscope and be sure that it's asbestos. Although sometimes, you're up in attics or whatnot, and you'll see labels still on products that say asbestos something or other. And that's obviously good enough for you to take their word on it.
Let's say you plan on pulling up and replacing old tile. Can a homeowner test the tile for asbestos themselves before they do the work?
The big box stores sell test kits where you can get a sample and send it off to a laboratory, and then they'll give you, their opinion after they've looked at it. So you can do that sort of thing, but what you definitely don't want to do is what you just described, of breaking things up. The term that they use, the word is called friable, and that means it's easily crumbleable, which makes it airborne. A single asbestos fiber can travel kilometers in the air before it hits the ground. So these things are really tiny, and if you disturb them, they float for hours and hours into the atmosphere.
Wow.
So you really, really don't want to do anything that could disturb the asbestos. You want to leave it in place.
If a surface or a product with asbestos is solid and sound and it's not breaking down, is there still a chance of exposure?
It would depend on the product. Like it has asbestos floor tiles that are in good shape, I wouldn't stress about those. The term the industry used was encapsulated, that the asbestos fibers are encapsulated inside something else and they can't get out. But if you drag something across the tile and scrape it, you could release them. So things like, areas where you want to be careful for that. Certainly if you have asbestos cement pipe or siding, if you're not drilling or doing anything to it, you don't need to go and remediate it. But if you have anything that is friable, that's dusty, that you can touch it and it crumbles, that's the stuff that's got to go because it's in the house and it stays in the air and never leaves.
If you're removing old products that you think could contain asbestos, how can you reduce your exposure?
Sure. The old tried and true tactics still work pretty well of wetting things down. Dust doesn't float if it's covered in water, right? It just drops down onto the ground. You can get full face respirators that have HEPA filters. I have one of those that I bought myself. I got a 3M model that has a fan so it can blow through it. It's really difficult to breathe with some of those if it doesn't push the air for you. But that's the kind of thing you can do to protect yourself. Wet things down, get HEPA vacs. But realistically, if you think there's a lot of asbestos, it's just something you don't want to try to do yourself because you could have health problems decades later, and the money you saved, it's not really worth your health.
We're always recommending an N95 mask for drywall dust and wood dust, but for asbestos, you would need a respirator with a special filter to protect your lungs.
It's not just the filter, it has to seal really well. Like back in the day, a lot of companies gave their workers, the 3M dust masks, the little white ones we've all used.
Right.
Those don't seal to your face. Those are practically useless in protecting asbestos because those fibers are so small. So what's really important is to get a mask that completely covers the nose and mouth and fits properly. Some places have classes that teach you how to do that as part of, OSHA certification and all that. But the making sure you don't breathe it is the most important thing. If you can get those disposable jumpsuits and wear that, that's another way you can protect yourself.
Very smart, yeah. If you were diagnosed with an asbestos-related illness, how would you file a claim?
Sure, that's what we do all day is we file claims on behalf of people who got injured through asbestos. And there's a couple of ways that can be done. You've all probably seen on the TV the $30 billion set aside in trust funds. That's absolutely exists. It's set up to make it a process of getting claims without having to go through court. Those claims can be filed by people who were exposed in a certain time frame, and that's typically either 1982 or 1986. You have to have worked with asbestos before then to be eligible. But as bad as that sounds, it's not as bad as you might think because of the way that asbestos takes so long to cause disease. Today, the average amount of time that passed between working with asbestos and getting diagnosed with mesothelioma is now up to over 50 years.
Wow.
So the absolute minimum, if you go into the worst remodel that you can do and have the craziest level of exposure you can think of, you're going to be at least a decade out before there's even a chance you get sick. That's how long it takes, is a minimum of a decade. But realistically, for most diseases, it takes decades. So that's something people need to understand, is that, when they do work with this stuff, they're not going to feel anything or get sick right away. It'll be years later, and they might forget about it. That happens a lot too. People forget how they were exposed. So that's part of our job, to help file those claims, is figure out how they were exposed. And, we have good databases of where products were sold, so we can help do that work for people. And either for people who were exposed after the 80s or who are willing to go to court, we can also go and do the whole, suing the companies that made the products or that put them installed, doing that sort of thing. But the key thing is, if somebody has been diagnosed with an asbestos-related disease, it's because of things they did decades ago.
I saw on your website that you help military members learn if they might have been exposed to asbestos while serving.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we have good databases of what products were at different military bases. I can just say, if they were in the Navy, they were absolutely exposed. It was all over the ships. I've been fortunate enough to take a couple of tours of some of the ships that are museums now, and still recognize, oh, I know who made that boiler, and yep, this installation would have been asbestos. But even folks that weren't in the Navy, if you were stationed on a base, you could have been exposed. And, all kinds of places all over the world, people were shipped. We have tons of clients who had at least some exposure in the armed forces because it was used everywhere. And a lot of the United States military specifications specifically called for asbestos. So that was a pretty good way to presume it was around. The only qualified products had asbestos. It was a military spec.
Yeah, what a shame, huh?
Absolutely. So many veterans were exposed to just doing their duty and serving the country, and it comes back to bite them decades later.
How does your company help homeowners?
We provide free information to people about how asbestos was used and where it was. Realistically, somebody who's listening to the podcast, who's young and healthy today, if they're going to get sick from something they do, I'm probably going to be dead and gone by the time that happens. So I'm doing this because it's important to me. I don't want people to keep getting sick from this stuff. So we try to build good archives of information to teach people what to look for, what companies, you can recognize a label and know that that product had asbestos in it. This is still out there. It's still dangerous, but it just doesn't have the warning signs like maybe it once did.
Yeah, that's great to help people with that knowledge. How did you become an expert in asbestos?
So when I went to law school, I wasn't intending to become an asbestos attorney. I knew I wanted to help people who'd been injured, but I wasn't necessarily sure which direction I was going to go. And the first firm that hired me out of law school, I interned there over a couple summers, and they did asbestos work. As I came up to speed on that, I learned some things that, it's not an exaggeration to say, changed the course of my life. See, I had lost both of my maternal grandparents and my father to cancers that none of us knew at the time asbestos was the cause. My grandparents were heavy smokers. Oh, of course they got lung cancer. It was sad, but that's what happens when you smoke. What I didn't know was that people who smoked and also were exposed to asbestos are far more likely to get these diseases than people who were just a smoker. So when I started digging into this and realizing, my God, that's what happened to my family members, I took a very deep personal interest in it. And I see echoes of my own family and many of my clients. It's very nice for me to be able to do something for those families, because by the time my family found out through me what had really killed our loved ones, too many years had passed and none of us were able to do anything.
Sure.
So I kind of fell into it by accident, but it ended up being a really perfect fit for me. And I dedicate most of my days to learning something or doing something about asbestos anymore.
Your website has a lot of information about asbestos, but you also have some other platforms with information?
Yeah, our website, asbestosclaims.law, has a good amount of content about asbestos. And for people who are interested in learning about the disease mesothelioma, the rare cancer caused almost exclusively by asbestos, we have understandingmeso.com. It's got a really nice 45-minute video going up there where we walk through all of the things of the diseases and talk a little bit about asbestos. But the best place if you want to learn about it would be our YouTube channel. We have over 300 videos, and we have one. It's a 5-part video called Asbestos 101, and it goes through everything from where asbestos came from, how it was used, legal stuff, medical stuff. It's the full asbestos story. And it's a nice, like I said, 5-part video on our YouTube, which is at Asbestos Claims Law.
I've heard the term secondhand exposure. Could you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. Most people who were exposed to asbestos in a large way were exposed on the job. They were working in it for hours every day. That's the typical exposure. But secondary exposure or take-home exposure happens when somebody who works with asbestos has asbestos come home with them on their clothes and they bring it into the house. And we have a number of clients who that's how they got sick. It was typically a husband or a father, but occasionally a mother or a wife who had a job where they worked with asbestos. And it sticks to your clothes. There's electrostatic charges that make asbestos just stick to you. And you bring it home, and over time, it's your loved ones that end up getting a disease. Maybe you don't. That's kind of one of the fascinating things, like all sorts of cancers. You can't tell if two people both start smoking on the same day, if one or both of them are going to get cancer. Maybe they both do, maybe that neither of them do. It's kind of the same thing with asbestos. And some of the saddest stories that we've had are gentlemen who worked for years with asbestos every day, raw asbestos, and they brought it home and they never got sick, but their wife or child did. So I'd advise all of your listeners that if they are doing any work around asbestos at a property, don't bring it back into your house. Wear that protective clothing. This stuff is dangerous, and there's no way to predict exactly who will or won't get sick. The gentleman that I'm thinking of, his job was he pulled asbestos out of 50-pound sacks every day and worked with it to put it into screens for making chlorine products. He was fine. His wife is no longer with us because of what he brought home.
Wow.
And he was the one that worked with it every day for 20 plus years. There has been an uptick in the decades. The typical person that used to be, the typical profile of somebody with an asbestos disease was usually a man who worked in a blue collar setting. But over the past decades, they've tracked, and the CDC came out with a study a few years ago that shows that the greatest increase is actually among women. And that's that usually, but not always, but usually through that take-home exposure. Additionally, there were lots of asbestos products in the house that kind of would compound on that. So I've got a big collection of, I call them artifacts, and I have oven mitts and trivets and even a kitchen thermometer that was made with asbestos. So asbestos, like the more of it you breathe, the more likely you are to get sick. So every single bit of that exposure counts. And women were exposed in the home through duties if their husband worked with asbestos, but also just through everyday use of regular things. I mean, asbestos was as common in the home in the 60s as plastic is in the home today.
Wow. How does asbestos damage your body?
So asbestos, it can cause the diseases that it causes because these little fibers, if you inhale them or swallow them, they make their way to various portions of the body. The lungs is where the typical person gets injured, and it's really easy to understand. Oh, you inhale it and they go into the lungs. But through body transport mechanisms in the lymphatic system and other ways, these fibers can go around various parts of the body. And once they've embedded themselves there, just like if you get a splinter in your finger, it never really heals until you get rid of the splinter. It's the same thing on your lung tissue or other tissues in the body. And over enough time, those unhealed scars, those can turn into cancer. The classic disease associated with asbestos exposure is mesothelioma, which is a cancer of the lining of certain portions of your body where your organs are. It can also cause lung cancer and throat cancer and colon cancer and stomach cancer. There's research showing maybe kidney cancer. And for women, it also can cause ovarian cancer. And, women get a double exposure from asbestos. A lot of them who got ovarian cancer worked with talc, baby powder. My mom used it all the time. So did my grandma.
Sure.
And a lot of talc came from mines that would be contaminated with asbestos. So you'd have a vein of asbestos going through this talc. Well, talc dust and asbestos dust pretty much looks alike to the naked eye. So they had no idea, maybe initially they didn't. The companies eventually learned their stuff was contaminated. But the consumers certainly would have no idea that the baby powder they're working with, the talc had asbestos in it. So anywhere they would dump the baby powder, they're putting that fibers up in the air and breathing them. And through the body's complex networks, those fibers would travel around and could cause those diseases. So any of those kinds of diseases, even in smokers, might have been caused by asbestos exposure, especially decades ago.
If you think you've had exposure to asbestos, can you have your doctor run a specific test?
NIOSH recommends that if you've worked with asbestos, you should get tested every 2 years. We've caught cancer several times. I'm proud to know that we've had people live a few years longer than they otherwise would have because they caught the cancer early enough to treat it. A simple chest x-ray will show if somebody has asbestos damage to their lungs or not. Those scars leave a specific pattern that is very easily observable on an x-ray. So it's not a particularly invasive test. And if somebody worked extensively with asbestos, they should definitely get checked out. The longer they worked with it, the more likely it is that they may have a disease. But I do want to be clear, most people that worked with asbestos did not get cancer and die. But the same can be said of cigarettes, and no one's going to tell you that smoking cigarettes is safe. Both can kill.
If I wanted to learn more about your company, where would I go?
You can check us out on our website at asbestosclaims.law or at our YouTube channel. It's YouTube at asbestosclaimslaw. No dot, just at asbestosclaimslaw.
This was very interesting. I really appreciate your time, Justinian. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show, and it's been a pleasure.
Wow, that was a great interview.
Yeah, very interesting. And they have a lot of information about asbestos on their website, and that's asbestosclaims.law. It's ASBESTOSCLAIMS.LAW.
Cool. Let's wrap this up.
You can subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review.
You can check out our home improvement videos on our YouTube channel, Fix It Home Improvement.
And you can subscribe to that as well.
You can download our ebooks, Home Improvement Solutions, What Every Homeowner Should Know, books 1 through 20 on Amazon.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star rating and review.
You can email us at fixitpodcast@gmail.com, and you can follow us on Instagram, Fix It Home Improvement.
Thank you for listening.
Talk to you next week.
Do